It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
All right. We're back. You know, today's headlines read like the proof of all these things which I talk about every day. And I'm stunned by Americans' indecisiveness, unwilling to put that at risk, which it's fleeting. It has no value. Whatever it is that you have ascribed your loyalty to, it has no value. Instead, we sit here and try to rationalize our own self-treason. That's the willful knowledge that we are betraying our own best interests. We hear everywhere that our leadership is doing things on our behalf and for our best interest, that China is our friend, Russia is our friend. Really? Well, it's time that we called those two countries what they are. They're sworn enemies of liberty and freedom. Both countries. There's a guy in Bloomberg who works for the Bloomberg Financial Times. Financial Times is not a Bloomberg-owned entity, by the way. I mean the Bloomberg Financial Network, and they have their own this guy who has written many articles in the past, including some that were quite negative about the Chinese leadership. The last time he wrote one, they were threatened to have their news desk kicked out of China. And this guy wrote an article about the ties that the wealthiest men in China have to the families of the top Chinese leaders. And it's an investigative report. He's been working on it for the better part of a year with help from their editor and a host of other writers within the organization. And suddenly, at the 11th hour and 59th minute, they cancel the publication of it, and he gets fired. The New York Times put out a piece that says Bloomberg News is said to curb an article that might anger China. A guy named Matthew Winkler, he's the longtime editor-in-chief of Bloomberg News, and he actually came out and said, if we run the story, we'll be kicked out of China. He defended his decision to say to block this story. And by the way, Michael Bloomberg was instrumental. The nanny mayor from New York was instrumental because he's the head of Bloomberg News. That's his organization. And he was the guy who put the final kibosh on it. And he defended this decision, Winkler did, comparing it to the self-censorship by foreign news bureaus trying to preserve their ability to report inside Nazi Germany. Really? So what you're trying to tell me is that the ends justify the means, and a Machiavellian concept that to sell yourself out and the public, the readership of your organization and Bloomberg News, it's okay to hide stories for fear that you'll be kicked out of the country so that you can continue to report. Well, what's the point of your continuing report if you can't tell the truth? Four people from Bloomberg have come forward, 4 employees, and claim that the company is self-censoring to keep China happy. They've held back this damning investigation into this Chinese billionaire's ties to the government. You see, this is not just happening in China. This is the same exact thing that's happening here. Don't you see the manipulation, the pressure that's on? For anyone in the media to not piss off the administration? Do you wonder why we're not fed truth? Why we're given propaganda by the pound? It's ridiculous. Tom Donahue, the president and the CEO of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, came out the other day and made this statement about why immigration reform is necessary. Because there's not enough Americans to do the job. Let me tell you something. We have a 20% unemployment in this country. Not enough Americans to do the job, or not enough Americans who will do the job as the slave labor you demand. The same kind that's practiced every day in China. The same one that manufactured that Apple iPhone you're walking around with, or that Apple Macintosh laptop you've got. The truth is, the slave labor camps in China are notorious. But the media is afraid to talk about it. They're afraid to talk about the corruption. They're afraid to talk about the communist dictatorship. Instead, we've got idiots like John Kerry in our Department of State who say we should be emulating China. If that doesn't go to the root of their thinking, I don't know what does. And if that's the way they think, what do they have in store, planned for you? You want proof that it's happening here? The D.C. Commissioner for Insurance, who is a highly regarded guy, he was appointed by the mayor of D.C., but he came out the other day and he criticized Obama's fix for Obamacare, saying that these insurance companies have spent years and millions of dollars recreating these plans based on a government mandate that was instituted by this president. And now he comes out and says, well, let's forget all that. You can go back and start selling the plans again that you had before. And they've changed their books and their business model, and they've created these new programs. They've cut doctors and eliminated hospitals. But let's forget all about that. Let's go back. Well, guess what? He came out and said, he criticized it, saying this doesn't pass the smell test. and he was immediately fired. So you say it's not happening here? You're wrong. It is happening here. It's happening here just like it happens there. Bloomberg is just one example. They're afraid they'd be kicked out of China. Here, the media says, well, we can't report on that story or we'll never get another interview with the White House. So what? Your job is to educate and inform the public about what is going on. You are the fourth estate. You have an obligation, a fiduciary obligation, to not be the forefront leaders in the Ministry of Propaganda, the public mouthpiece of an administration. What are you, Pravda? See, the truth is that Bloomberg in China, their fears are actually well-founded. The last time they published a story like this, they were blocked. In fact, it got even worse. They can't get a visa for any of their people to work in China. And their Chinese language edition was blocked inside China after they did an expose in October of 2012, a year ago, that cast the premier, he was the premier at that time, into a negative light. And the publication since that time hasn't had a single residency visa approved. So the threats are real. The only difference between the threats there and the threats here is they can't withhold your visa here because you live here, you belong here. But what they can do is they can manipulate you. They can buy you. They can pressure you, coerce you, compromise you. And the media has given in. I call them the Ministry of Propaganda for a reason. They have completely, totally, and utterly capitulated to tyranny. Out of fear. Fear that their bottom line would be hurt. Fear. Fear that their people won't get a chance to sit and interview the president. Fear that when they're in the press corps conference, they're not going to get called on when their hand is raised. The truth of the matter is, that's not what the press is here for. The press is supposed to be working to educate and inform the masses about those issues which are around us, that are affecting your very lives. But they're willing to acquiesce and be quiet for the sake of access. You see, if we don't have an independent press, our country is lost. How will the people be informed of the tyranny that is being instituted upon you? It worked in Russia. It works in China. It's working in Russia. It worked in every communist bloc country. It worked for every government that has ever become totalitarian and authoritarian in their nature. I don't care what ism you put after it. But the number one thing they do is control the media. Because once you've controlled the media, you have an uninformed populace, and they can't fight against what they don't know about. Every press organization, every single last one, all of the majors, ABC, NBC, CBS, MSLSD, Communist News Network, fake news. Yes, I say fake news. You know why? Because faux news won't tell you about Common Core. You know why? Because Roger Ailes, the leader of Fox News, and Murdoch, the president, the owner of Fox News, he won't tell you the truth. He also owns the Wall Street Journal. Well, he's deeply involved, and he wants Common Core to go forward. So he won't allow damaging news articles to run across his organization's website and television programs. Why don't you hear Common Core coming out of the mouth of Bill O'Reilly, Sean Hannity? Why don't you hear Common Core stories coming out from Brett Baer? Because those stories don't ever hit the wire. So it's not just Bloomberg that's guilty of treason, self-treason, against their own best interests, number one, and two, their obligation and their fiduciary responsibility to truthfully be exposers. That is their job. I'm not saying you can't do a story about the catbird and the dog that fell down the well and the tornado. I'm saying that when there are stories that implicate the entire nation, when your knowledge of a fact or an issue that's going on is so intrinsically tied to the future of our nation, they have an obligation to tell you about it. I read an article this morning about how Woodward came out and said, oh, it's going to get a lot worse. Woodward and Bernstein fame from the days of Nixon. Well, guess what? Where the hell was Woodward when we had Obamacare getting passed in the first place? Why weren't the press telling us what was really in that bill? And now they're all rushing forward to say, well, see, all this bad stuff is happening. Yeah, well, where were you when the American people needed to be informed about it before Nancy Pelosi came out and said, well, you got to pass it to see what's in it? I mean, it's ridiculous. Do you know what the fastest growing region for income is in the United States of America? Washington, D.C. Do you know that the average house in Washington, D.C. is on the market for 9 days? 9 days. In most parts of the country, people have had their homes for sale for 900 days. Where's the news? Where's the news that the fat cats are and the lobbyists and the people who suck the blood of the nation like ticks are becoming fat and swollen on your money? That the $7 trillion that this administration has spent is being siphoned off and fed to an ultra elite. Do you know that the vast majority of one percenters no longer live in New York and L.A.? They live in Washington, D.C. Hollywood is passé. They're the small guys now. New York, the super wealthy, the place where all the elite met. Nah, not anymore. Now it's D.C. That's where the real money is. Where's the press on that? Why do we hear about things afterwards? Where's the press on Fast and Furious? Where's the press on Benghazi? Why aren't they writing scathing articles? Why isn't the press explaining to America what impeachment is and how it's processed? Why isn't the press supporting the idea that immigration is bad for America until the borders are sealed? Why isn't the press talking to us about those things that matter? Why isn't the press telling us that globally $123 billion a year leaves the United States to go back to people's foreign homes? Yes, these people who work here in the United States send back home money to their families through Western Union, $123 billion a year. That's money that leaves our shores that will never, ever return. Why isn't the press, the media, the national media, talking about prosecution for Obama's health care program? What, we can't talk about that? Well, let me tell you something. The Federal Trade Commission has rules out there. Those rules state that if you defraud people in an effort to sell your product, you go to prison. Orson Swindle, he served as the FTC chairman from 97 to 2005, an 8-year run. Here's what he has to say. There are a number of practices that if healthcare.gov were a private entity would result in being taken to the shed and horsewhipped by government regulators. Unfair and deceptive acts or practice in or affecting commerce. This includes, quote, a representation, omission, or practice that is likely to mislead the consumer, such that the consumer would be likely to have chosen differently but for the deception. Withholding information from healthcare.gov visitors about the actual price until you registered? Deceptive practice. If Amazon did that, if eBay did that, they would be shut down. Their leaders would be dragged before a criminal court. They would be sued civilly. Their entire organization would be in ruins. The misrepresentation, the lies. Where is the media? What price have they accepted for their silence and their betrayal of their absolute duty to the United States of America and the people in this country? You know why they owe you a fiduciary responsibility, to be honest? Well, first of all, they survive on the subscriptions and the advertising that they sell you. So therefore, they have an obligation to do the right thing by you. Other than that, it's what? Deceptive practices. If they sit there and they say, we are the purveyor of news, but they refuse to publish the truth, then they are deceptive in their practice. The truth is, you should basically not subscribe to any and pay any attention to any mainstream media whatsoever. I only follow their stuff because I have to talk about what's going on there. But the truth is, you should be sourcing alternative news systems that are willing to tell you the truth. Yes, you have to be discerning about what you read. But the truth of the matter is, if you want to be fully informed, if you want to be fair and balanced, you sure are not going to get it from any of them. If you want to be knowledgeable about what's going on, you should be reading alternative media. I've got sources on americasvoicenow.org. Go click on them and learn what they are. You don't have to experiment. Don't take my word for it. Find your own. But the truth of the matter is, listen, there is ample information out here about the betrayal, the treason, the absolute complete dysfunction and malfeasance of government, the high crimes and the misdemeanors that are poured upon us every day. We don't have to look to China to find it. We can find it right in our own backyard. But if you're not willing to go out there and educate yourself, if you're not willing to do the research and the homework necessary, then that's on you. Because the information is there. You know, you've heard the phrase that ignorance of the law is no excuse. You're obligated to know that when that sign over there says maximum speed 55 miles an hour, if you do 70, you're going to get a ticket. And the reason you keep it under 70 is because it's self-preservation. The reason that you don't rob a bank is because you know that it's illegal to rob a bank. Well, with all due respect, if you're not willing to go out there and look at the scandals, the betrayals, the wholesale sale of your government to corporate interests, private interests, banking, banksters, that's on you. I watched C-SPAN the other day, and I watched Janet Yellen being interviewed by Congress for her new upcoming seat as the head of the Federal Reserve. One of the congressmen said to her, I don't understand. You know, this low interest rate that you've kept, where interest is at zero, is killing the savers in America. The seniors, the people who have got CDs out there, who have put their money aside in 401ks. The only people that are making money are the fat cats. And her response was stunning to me. I'm going to find it, and I'm going to post it up there. You can find it on C-SPAN, but you'd have to hunt because it was like a 3-hour program. I know, when most of you are sitting there watching a movie, I'm sitting there watching C-SPAN. Janet Yellen being interviewed by these knuckleheads in Congress. What she said was utterly astounding. Well, I got to paraphrase it for you, but while it is true that our low interest rates are destroying savers, if they look at it in the overall whole context, it's good for the nation. So it's okay for Americans to be sacrificed on the altar of altruism so that people and entities and organizations in government can suck the money out of our nation like a vacuum. That's what she was saying. Where's the media talking about that this morning? Where's the media explaining to you what the Federal Reserve really is and who they are and what they do? Have you ever seen an expose? No. Has anybody really exposed the DHS and what they're doing? No. Has anybody exposed the fact that we now have a private army in this country that is as large as the army that we have overseas in Afghanistan and Iraq and run by the Pentagon? No. Where is the investigative journalism about Fast and Furious? Where are the investigative journalists who are getting inside information about the IRS scandals? About Obamacare scandal? Crickets. We're the Woodward and Bernsteins when we need them. And now we've got Woodward, fat, comfortable, dumb, and happy, sitting there saying, well, you know, It's going to get a little bit worse before it gets better. He was on an interview with Chris Wallace the other day, and he says, I have to think about this. It's a mess, clearly, but what it isn't, and I think you have to look at the question of motive. And the president's motive here, even though there are deep problems with the implementation, he wants to do something good for 30 million people and get them health insurance. So this isn't Watergate. This isn't Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. Oh, really? Mr. Woodward, it's all of those things and more. This is an utter, flat-out deception. Deceptive marketing done by the United States of America, which, quite frankly, to use the phrase of the other phrase I read you earlier, which is that if you were to utilize those same deceptive practices, the FTC would hold you accountable. Representation, omission, or practice that is likely to mislead the consumer, such that the consumer would have likely chosen differently but for the deception. So I beg to differ, Mr. Woodward and Mr. Wallace. This is deception. It is fraud. It is Watergate. It is Clinton and Lewinsky. And it's worse. It was about rigging an election. Woodward goes on to say, yeah, there's no question about that. But you see all these stories in this frenzy out there. The game's over. The presidency is over. Some people are saying, I think that's not the case. But here's the other side of this, which I would agree with George Will on. When you go down the road, it's going to get worse because you talk to the experts and they'll tell you that this is a money issue. It's going to blow a hole in the budget. And when we go in 2 or 3 months from now and have more, are we going to shut down the government, quote unquote? Are we going to pay for the debt we have? All of a sudden, this is going to come to the table and people are going to say, my God, it's going to cost so much more money than we were spending on these things before. So how do you disentangle this now from Obama's head? Now, can he learn? This is an executive function, which is something he's not starred in so far in his presidency. And can he get it together? You know, everyone says he is bright. Can he learn to manage? Well, it goes without saying, Mr. Woodward, that this is going to blow a hole in our budget. Not the Obama budget, the United States of Americans budget. And the truth of the matter is, where were you when we needed to know that then? What's the payoff been for you, Mr. Woodward? In this case, we don't really need your 20/20 hindsight. We needed your investigative journalism and your foresight. And now we don't need you at all. And that's the truth. Unvarnished. The truth is, had you all in the media told us what was really going to happen from Obamacare, had you informed the masses, it never would have passed in the first place. Had you all exposed Obama for the betrayer and the usurper and the foreign national that he is before he became elected in 2008, he would never have gotten elected. Had you informed us in 2012, when the ample evidence was there, he would have never been reelected. I call them the Ministry of Propaganda for a reason. That's what this is. Nothing short of deception, misdirection, propagandic examples that equally could be shown in Nazi Germany, Soviet Russia, Soviet China, and any other dictatorship or authoritarian around the world. No difference whatsoever. You've been listening to America's Voice Now. You can find us on the web at americasvoicenow.org, facebook.com/America's Voice Now, youtube.com/America's Voice Now. We'll be back in just a moment.